Yeah, let me turn the music down. Hello. Happy Sunday morning. Who in the chat was calling that music 90s? That's what I want to know. Who was saying that? Hi guys, it's Christy. I am back from 2 weeks of, well, actually 3 weeks, I think, in the end. I kind of stretched it out from a Wednesday to a following Tuesday, but yeah, back from holiday, readjusting to a normal work week, and time for another weekend winter. So hey guys, thank you for stopping by. I appreciate your visit, your time, and your attention. Also trying to do a little bit better with the sound. I noticed on my test video that I did yesterday, my sound was a little bit on the scratchy side. So I'm hoping now that I've got this all sorted, and I am doing the right mic and I'm not peaking or clipping as much. Nice to be doing this again. Well, yes. Welcome back, James. I see you guys in the chat. Yeah, a little bit too. I've switched around the interface, as you guys might have known if you saw the last show. Well, not really show, spontaneous hangout. Yeah, but I wanted to try to get things going a little bit faster today. Wow, that's just not wanting to go. Oh, there we go. Put that up a little bit higher against Lion Kitty. Yeah, I wanted to jump into things today, because in all honesty, this is something that I've been thinking about, white identity and white supremacy, for a while now. And it's one of those, I'm really struggling when I find this is quite unusual for me, but I'm actually quite struggling to figure out how to make a video about this, or how exactly I should go about discussing this. And so I thought, well, kind of lazy, but I thought I would first maybe do a talk with you guys, and through this process maybe identify the things that need to go into a future video, or things that really could be unpacked more in maybe a 5-minute video that I could work on. So let me just change the transition. I'm still playing with the environment in the interface. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, well, no, that pretends it's a conversation. I was, so I just noticed a little listening to ska punk, no criticism with the 90s faux thing. Yes, it's Creative Commons music, so that's mostly why. And then it's the tolerable kind of Creative Commons music that's available. If you ever go looking for Creative Commons music, you'll know it's a little hit and miss. The background to this is that I actually, on vacation, recorded on my phone a video talking about this issue. But in the end, I felt more that I was processing the information than delivering the video script, if that makes sense. So I decided to try to set up another talk about this live on Friday. That went terribly because of my technical inabilities with the new Go Live system. I couldn't do it as I normally do on OBS. But on Friday night, I did spend time writing out yet more ideas about white guilt, white supremacy, and white identity. So I have a lot to talk to you guys about, and I'll try to do it in a systematic way. But the small background to this is that confronting racism in the Trump era has been both very similar to not experiences, but things I've witnessed about racism, and also completely unique. And I myself, in my own life, I am somebody, it's something in my own life that I feel like, not only do I feel like I need to deal with, but I see increasingly the poisonous effects of white supremacy in American politics. And so how do I, as a white person, a white American, go about examining this issue? Because unlike with feminism, where I can, shake my finger at the patriarchy and feel outside of it because I am excluded from the sort of spaces that men have historically occupied, women are seen still as outsiders or guests, or in token ways in a lot of elected bodies and even corporate boards. So I didn't have a participation in critiquing patriarchy from within. However, I have a lot of space to critique white supremacy from within the framework of America. And seeing it, of course, is the first thing. So let me go back a little bit to say that in terms of my experience growing up white, as a, like part of the dominant culture in America, my family was not overtly racist. I don't have experiences where people were dropping racial slurs around me. I really honestly don't have a lot of those. I struggle to think of times when I heard my family members as I was growing up, making racist comments or using racist slurs. I don't have this memory of it. And I think that in that case, I fell for the idea of being the good white person. I'm not the racist, I'm a good person. Lie that I think we're fed in America, that somehow like not being overtly racist is somehow enough. Like as long as you aren't using the N-word and you aren't expressing racist views, then you're not part of the problem, and therefore also not part of the solution. You have no obligation to fix other white people because you're a good person. Now, of course, these are my experiences, my impressions, my perceptions. But what I realize now looking back is that although I was not exposed to or had to deprogram myself from overt racism, from hostile racist attitudes within my family or society, I still picked up on and internalized a lot of racist stereotypes, racist assumptions, and other things that were available to me in the culture. That can be, just something as simple as the way that black actors are always cast as criminals or thugs, or, they're cast as the token, one black officer to kind of show that there's diversity besides the fact that everybody else in the team is white, kind of thing. And so while at the same time I had this mental framework of, I never said, I don't think I've ever said I don't see color, but I never questioned the need for racial justice, or the people who were, like the Rodney King beating, for instance, happened when I was growing up, and understanding police brutality, but in an abstract way, not in a personalized way, because I lived in white America and I lived in this white bubble where I didn't see police brutality or police discrimination because I didn't have friends who were black, because I didn't grow up around, people who were, eventually when I moved to Madison, I worked with a diverse group of people, but this wasn't something that came up that we talked about, and so even having the courage to have a conversation about racism in America and hearing people who aren't white, hearing their experiences of it, I had very little opportunity to do that. What happened, in reflecting back now, what was really important was that I began watching MSNBC, where they had a commitment to representation. On MSNBC, I was exposed for the first time systematically to Reverend Al Sharpton. I heard from Eugene Robinson, Melissa Harris Perry, if you guys remember, Joy Reid. There's a Eugene Robinson. There's a real diversity of black voices and black expertise. And this is what is also very important about representation. It wasn't just the fact that it was people who were black being brought on to talk about police brutality, or bringing black people on when the discussion was about the criminal justice system or something like that. They had black people on to talk about everything, from immigration to foreign policy to women's rights to the economy. Their representation wasn't just there in terms of providing a black voice or someone from the black community on a particular issue that whites had framed off as being of concern to black people, but having black people on to talk about a whole range of concerns and from their perspective gave me a framework I'd literally never had before. It gave me an opportunity to hear people that whose voices I hadn't heard on those kinds of topics and from their perspective. Now, sometimes their perspective was, no different from anyone around the table, but it still mattered that they were being asked for their opinion on issues that weren't traditionally Black. Just like, if I was up there and I was only ever asked about issues as when they were framed in terms of women's issues, which is subtle code usually for white women's issues, less so for every other woman's issues. Having that background in hearing a wide range of voices. Michael Steele, former RNC chair, is another person that I really, I routinely listen to, and then I listen to Eugene Robinson because they're usually on Morning Joe together to kind of like hear different takes from different parts of the community, different perspectives. But all of that sowed made the ground fertile, overturned the soil of my white media experience to give me a framework and give me an appreciation for the contributions from, the wide range of life experience from various people, from various backgrounds. And therefore, when it came to, so that would have been around the time of the Obama-Clinton, primary, when they were first running, 2007? Does that sound about right? I think so. 2007, 2008 is when I really, really started watching quite a lot of MSNBC. Oh my gosh, all of you guys remember back when you could actually queue your videos up on the MSNBC website? Do you remember that? When you could put your videos in a queue and you could just I would go through all the shows and I would just add them to my queue, and then I'd have about 2 hours worth of content. That was awesome. They don't do that anymore. They haven't done that for years. Having had the experience of listening to and respecting and valuing the voices of people from a wide range of backgrounds, not because they were Black. Like Eugene Robinson does have a Black perspective, and his discussion about having the talk as a child about how, as a Black boy or a Black girl, you have to interact with a police officer in order not to be shot, is so valuable. But he's not a person I put into a category. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner, for God's sake. He's got a really interesting opinion on most things, and I don't always agree with him. Very recently, he was dismissing Joe Biden getting important facts about various service members incorrect by conflating them all into one story. And I completely disagree. I think that you show respect by getting the facts right and by knowing the names of the people you talk about and not blending 3 individual incidents and 3 individuals suffering into one story because it's neater. So it's not a case of being uncritically accepting of what someone's view is. It's more about building up a relationship with somebody, and which is what you kind of do with the media, from a perspective that you don't have, and honoring that. And I think that was a really important experience that I needed to have. It's a mental framework for appreciating other people's perspectives that I needed to develop through experience, and that then allowed me to build on that expectation and valuing of representation in the media into my YouTube experience and also on Twitter. So moving from that, I had I think developed a much different approach to consuming information, as I said before, watching all of these people from various diverse backgrounds than I did in the past. And then we kind of come up against Trump and his racist, really taking advantage of and amping up white supremacist fear, rhetoric, and normalizing it as a worldview, which is kind of where we're coming down to confronting being white, because that grounding in hearing other people talk from different backgrounds, the representation issue, I still always did from a perspective of being the dominant group. I mean, I was still a white person, and even though I was becoming more sensitized to the identity lens through which other people are born into and experience the world because of their location, based on their ethnicity or their class assignment or whatever that nexus is, it never reflected back. I never reflected back on my own, and the way that my white identity is also completely a social construct that I inherited by virtue of being born on American soil with a certain skin type. I had this history, this white history, put on me through education, through socialization, through other norms in the culture like patriotism, and I hadn't really questioned it. I hadn't taken the time to unpack the legacy that I was being asked to carry on and defend going forward. Because that's what we do as social creatures. We are born into a socially constructed world that we had no power over. We didn't choose things that happened 200 years ago. But we're caught up in the system. And as we become adults, we become part of perpetuating it or transforming it. That's up to us. And now that I've got this power, I've got a YouTube channel, I've got a little bit of status, what am I doing about that social construct that I was born into? Am I going to take it unquestionably forward and just pass it on as is, as many people before me have done, or transform it into more poisonous framework, which some people have done, or to try to actually transform it to be closer to the things that we like about American ideals, about the idea that everyone is entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Where does white identity and white power historically fit into that? And I feel like at this point I need to take a little break. I've been talking a lot. I'm not used to talking this long. So what I want to do is I want to come back to how far did I get? Also, I don't know if it's a time of year, but my eyes are really watering. My nose is really dripping. And I feel like I need to cough a lot or clear my throat. So my apologies. This might not be a super long episode. But I want to just check the chat really quick here. Before I move on, because then we're going to start talking about white identity and white nationalism, and it's my thoughts on that. But before we do, I'll just check the chat. Let me share my screen. Hey, there you are, chat. You guys aren't saying too much, and that's okay. It's my job to do the show. It's not your job to entertain me, but on the off chance people had something. Right, so let's see what people are saying. I thought this channel was a laughing and mocking Sargon channel. It's all I'd ever see for a few months. Well, I mean, that was because he was running for office. It was a laughing and mocking Sargon channel because he was an embarrassment to himself. So yeah, hell yes, we covered that embarrassing campaign that he ran and lost terribly at and humiliated himself. That was political news for weeks. Yeah, trying to become MEP. Sargon is a phenomenon, so bloody dumb. He has such a cool accent. Maybe he should do narrations for National Geographic. Well, anything that does require a brain cell would not be... Yeah, he could mouth the words, but he wouldn't always know what they meant. Right. Someone is a racist POS. You guys are just chatting about Sargon in my mentions. Hello, Flint Reed, welcome. And also Rana King, hi there. French accents. All right, you guys don't have anything to say. By the way, and this is not, I don't know if you can or not, but this is not an invitation, but I have allegedly been remonetized by YouTube. I was briefly demonetized because I was mirroring the happy hour. PragerU breaks down. Yeah, we can do that next time, actually. I'm not opposed to doing a PragerU thing, but I did want to get some of these ideas out and get some reaction. So far, not so much in the terms of reaction, but we will get back to PragerU. Diligently listening. Listening to my rambles, thanks for that. Just being aware that there's a problem, trying to do something about it, both internally and externally. Yeah, that's a first step, I think. That's what I found anyway, is learning that there is a problem, understanding it, not necessarily correctly, but maybe understanding it from a lot of different perspectives, and then figuring out a course forward. And that's sort of where I feel like I am on the issue of white nationalism and white supremacy is on the course to figuring out how to find my voice. And with that, actually, I think I know that we've only just started, but I think I would like to take a little, just a short break. I want to top up my coffee, collect my thoughts. I feel like even though it's only been going 20 minutes, I've done a lot of conceptual and thought work in that first section, and I want a little break before I move on. So can we just take a 2-minute break here really fast? I'll flop back to the music, mute myself, go top up my coffee, have a think, and then crack on with the harder stuff, which is my ideas that I've been formulating on white identity and white nationalism. So let me just set up the pre-show window and turn up the music. Okay, and swap over. So 2 minutes, we'll be right back. Hello, I'm back. Let me turn the music down. Thank you for waiting there, you guys. I do appreciate that. Appreciate your patience, letting me take it at my pace. Nighttime here, no coffee. Absolutely not, Rana. Not if you want to have an enjoyable night's sleep. I, on the other hand, want to have an enjoyable day. So my coffee wasn't quite empty enough to fill it up with a new brand of coffee or a new cycle on my machine. So I just threw some powdered nut-flavored cappuccino mix into it and a bit of water on top and threw it in the microwave. That's terrible. That's so awful. Oh, anyway. All right. So we've talked about the framework by which I grew up. And I actually don't need this anymore because I don't have to listen to the music. My hair is like very flippy, and I've just decided to let it do whatever the F it wants. I'm tired of trying to train this, and as long as it both does the same thing, I'm like, it's fine, whatever. All right, that's an aside we didn't need. Yes. So I had that background coming into the ideas about confronting racism and doing racial justice, but I still wasn't quite there yet. The next, I know, microwaving coffee. I know, it's horrible, but it was, I only had 2 minutes. I needed to get hot water. Right, so it wasn't enough just to know things in the abstract. I think another thing that took it up another level for me was the emergence of Black Lives Matter as a movement, dealing with issues that were facing people of color, but historically were, are rooted in the kind of discrimination, state level discrimination directed at Black Americans, and in other situations, other Americans of color over time. But I kind of think of the historical links between like police oppression and the Black community in America. So their issues, the things that they were asking for, which were completely reasonable, like don't militarize the police, put on body cams, have independent investigations of police shootings, not internal ones, all seemed completely reasonable to me. And I supported, but I didn't go out in the streets. Well, I mean, I wasn't living in the States. But it wasn't something I kind of gave voice to. It wasn't something that, I did a video or two on it. But even then I felt a little bit that white discomfort of talking about racial issues. I think that's socialized into American white identity. So that was another step. And then when Trump got elected, part of the Women's March, people were marching for Black Lives Matter and for immigrant women and immigrant people in general, but the kinds of intersections of issues that people felt empowered to bring into the Women's March and represent there as concerns for everyone, for women, for everybody else who doesn't identify as a woman. The Women's March was still a reaction to a really sexist president, but it wasn't the only framework through which activism was being conceived of. It was perceived as, and I think it still is, a general resistance to Trump's policies. So that also brought that nexus of activism and consciousness together. And another really important step was seeing the racist Beckys. If I'm just going to call like the heuristic, is watching video after video after video after video of white women calling in the cops on brown people, screaming at brown people, using racist epithets against people who are like in a parking lot or barbecuing or whatever else. And obviously with my critique of the patriarchy, my critique of sexism tends to be represented in men's bodies. And for me, as one of the good ones, as one of the good white people who wasn't racist, I also didn't associate with people who expressed those views. So I hadn't seen the ugly face of white women in America the way that I saw that on Twitter. I hadn't kind of envisioned the virulent bigotry of white women the way that I was seeing it on Twitter. Because remember, my perceptions of racists come also from the media. And those generally, I think exclusively, were men in white robes, men at lynchings, men like David Duke, men. And violence by white men against women and men of color, people of color. So even like white supremacy was framed within a patriarchal power structure, because white men were the ones who held the power. They were also, front and center when it came to abusing that power against other people. But the kind of the backup role, the parroting support role, the smarmy sidekick role played by white women was something I was only vaguely aware of, mostly probably through the resistance within first wave feminism to deal with abolition, or some people's, like, they would be concerned about ending slavery, but not so much about giving black women the same rights as white women and white feminism. And spending time on the outskirts of what I would call Black Twitter. I am not in the mixed Black Twitter. I am like just I follow a couple people who are on Black Twitter, and so I see it from the edges. But because that was circulated, those videos were circulated so widely, I saw my identity represented. I saw white women, the white women who voted for Trump, the white women who decided to go with their pocketbooks over a man who was talking about grabbing pee and being racist, the women who were voting for their own pocketbooks, their own sense of security, their own comfort in the supremacy of whites. And I saw those women, and they looked not that different from me. And it gave me some reflection, because again, it's not that I wasn't aware of these things in the abstract or in principle, but knowing something in an academic, theoretical, abstract way, and then seeing it in your face, these are two different kinds of knowledge. And I wasn't even dealing with these racist Beckys. I was just watching other people who were having to deal with them, and thinking about how their day was ruined because of this racist white woman who decided to put her nose in where it's nobody else's business, and also the very passive-aggressive nature of white women's racism. Whereas an open white racist man will say something, will use a racial slur, he'll sort of, come out and be the aggressor. Racist white women use the police. They'll call in their man. They'll call in their protector to come in and put these people of color in their place, or sort things out for the white lady. That was not a kind of racism I was prepared to see from anything that I had grown up with or seen even in the media. Because again, it's always framed very much in terms of maleness and men doing these things. But the way that white women are racist is gendered and really, really sexist. This brings us closer to where we are in time today. So all of this stuff had come together, in my mind. This experience of seeing representation, of learning to value the perspective of people from a diverse background as providing me insights I would have no other way of obtaining except by listening to them and what they had experienced or what they had heard from others or their perspective on something, and being open to those voices, being aware of the grind of daily or weekly slights, the sort of, I guess you call them the microaggressions, that racism doesn't always have to be blatant in your face to affect you, to be a part of your life on a systematic basis. Seeing that and internalizing it. And then finally, really seeing the way in which Trump was latching onto something in America that, he didn't invent. He didn't really even, have to put a lot of new ideas. He was just dragging something out of white America's closet. I guess the robes, perhaps, but putting them in khakis and a golf shirt instead. What he is bringing to the table is not unfamiliar. In fact, it is the most familiar refrain in American history. And that is, this country belongs to white people. That's ultimately what this is based in. And this is where it kind of starts to, like, for me, spin out. Because notions of white identity, white nationalism, and white guilt are phrases that we hear a lot and are talked about and thrown around a lot. But what I have finally twigged in my head, and there's a difference between like knowing it and again knowing the abstract and figuring it out for yourself. That the entire history of our American government has been one of white supremacy. It was designed to ensure the supremacy of white men, white propertied men in America. Now, if we had gone back to, sorry, I told you that with this allergy thing, a little bit of a stutteriness. If we went back and talked about like the history of the South African government, the role of apartheid would not be something I would feel like emotionally invested in dismissing or defending or somehow downplaying whatever. I would be very open about the fact that racism was part of the apartheid system of government. And yet, we don't and we should apply that exact same logic to American government. We tend to go, oh yeah, it was totally racist and it was built on slavery, but as if those things don't matter, as if we can dismiss the impact that that had on people's lives simply by dismissing it because it makes us feel uncomfortable as white people. And understanding that white supremacy is America's history is something, again, kind of abstractly I understood but hadn't really internalized. So as someone who was born into a government that was from the start designed to be white supremacist, to maintain the supremacy of whites. And this is what I'm going to mean about like white supremacy. I guess I should get to definitions in a second. I'm not necessarily saying that the Constitution is an overtly white supremacist document. What I'm saying is that the norms of it, the assumptions of it, are all grounded in the idea that whites would be supreme in their exercise and occupation and occupying positions of authority, whether that is in government, whether that is in business, or whether that is in religion. That was the assumption of the founding fathers. And we've been a little bit unconsciously, maybe not enough. I mean, maybe after the Civil War there was a bit of a confrontation with this, but working to undermine and undo that structure of supremacy for white men that was built into our Constitution. So that got me thinking about notions of white supremacy and white guilt and all of this stuff. And on the topic of white supremacy, I did look into a little bit. I should say that before going too much into thinking about other people's ideas on this and doing too much research, I wanted to get my own ideas clear in my head and think about this process. Basically, like, how did I come to my views? What is the history? What were the things along my path that were important to get to me to where this is today? And I've explained all of those. The notion now of white supremacy is something that we need to talk about, because I'm going to be talking about white supremacy a lot more often in my Twitter feed, and probably here too, because it's something I've becoming more comfortable in talking about, and not as a, oh, look at these white supremacists over here, or they're not like me, I'm the good white person. I'm going to talk about the kind of white supremacy that we're walking, like our culture is steeped in, that we don't even see because we're swimming in it. You know, like the whole idea that, you know, fish can't see water because it's everywhere around them. It's just part of their experience. And I think white supremacy is built into our culture like that. All right, so white supremacy, what is it? I did go to Wikipedia, have a look around, because it's a good place to start with debates around white supremacy. And it seems to be that the general consensus is when people talk about white supremacy, they link it with white nationalism and other forms of, say, hostile, active, racist attitudes. And that is a very explicit idea that whites is superior to any other ethnic group, and that superiority therefore implies a deserving or natural occupation of positions of power, or keeping a society together. Some sort of culture comes from this mixed bag of Europeans who've been murdering each other for centuries, apparently. And there's also some discussion whether or not that phrase should be expanded out to include other forms of racist attitudes. And I saw some white dude was saying, no, it should just be really limited, and a black commentator trying to use a more broad definition of it. I personally think that if we only call white nationalism the sort of David Duke way of looking at the world, or the Richard Spencer type of rhetoric, we're giving white people a real pass on the rest of the types of white nationalism that we are unconsciously socialized to internalize and defend. My position is that I would borrow from feminist critique. Oh, what are their names now? I should look this all up, and I didn't. But if you go to the Vox article about Kate Mann's notion of misogyny, and misogyny not just reconceptualizing misogyny not so much as the conscious hatred of women, which is again very rare, but more about a kind of like a resistance. Misogyny is the aggression and fear of any man or woman or anyone who challenges a traditional gender norm of what men and women are supposed to do in order to get more equality. And that kind of resistance to the idea that women don't naturally want to have babies, for instance, and that that's what women are good at, that is a type of misogyny. Not only the Elliot Rodger incel type of misogyny, which is a more conscious form of it, that it's you can have what two social psychologists identified as hostile sexism and benevolent sexism. So hostile sexism is women are inferior, women shouldn't be on the front lines of the military because they can't lift things, they're emotionally weak, they have periods so their hormones drive them crazy. All of these attitudes that view women as fundamentally, essentially, inferior to men on a bunch of subjective physical points that these people like to bring up. Benevolent sexism is not actually hostile. It could even be used, for instance, to give what might appear to be a social preference to women. So, women are, women shouldn't be expected to lift heavy things. So if a guy sees a woman carrying something heavy, like, oh, little lady, let me carry that big box for you. You're just a little thing. I can take this with my big man arms, and I'll take this and put it on the shelf for you. Now that in itself actually looks like it's helping women, but it's a patronizing view of women as weak and inferior, and putting them up on a pedestal. Or, sort of like rarefying, motherhood as this wonderful thing that, women do, and putting all women in that category. That's a benevolent, benign, that's what I think it was, benevolent, but it was benign sexism. So we can also think about, I think we need to think about white supremacy in both ways. That there is the Richard Spencer, David Duke types of Charlottesville marchers who want to actively create an ethno-state. And that is equivalent to, or, is conceptually similar to the idea of active or hostile sexism. Having that in your mind. And I think latent white supremacy is everything else that white culture has basically been steeped in. A sort of latent white supremacy is assuming that if a person, when you call a manager, it's going to be a white guy. When you go to vote in a booth, it's going to be a white man, or at least a white woman, but a white person. That the people in business are going to be white. There's a comfort and an assumption that those positions naturally go together. When you see a pilot or you hear the pilot's voice, you assume the pilot is a white man. Or when you go to see a doctor, you're going to assume you're going to see a white man. And it's all of that sort of naturally giving white men a kind of assumed credibility, because historically white men have kept every other group out of power, and so we're used to seeing white male bodies, white men's bodies, occupying various positions of power, whether that's religious leadership, political leadership, or economic dominance. And when we think about the history of America, not just here the Constitution, I'm talking about from the founding, the social norms that were being created as a consequence to the structure of America, that being slavery and ongoing invasion and occupation of people's lands, a constant theft of people's labor, lives, and land. That was the policy of our government. And to do that, they created a system that excluded everybody except white propertied men over the age of 30 to access power or even vote on who had power. So it was a white supremacist government. And they had really nice and lofty ideas for the rights that other white men would acknowledge other white men have. If we go back to Greece, for instance, in ancient times, when they had slavery, and they had philosophy that was talking about the importance of having, an equal in your companionship and having a mental match with somebody, and all of these nice ideas about the qualities and the beauty of human interaction, while they owned slaves. I don't think as Americans acknowledge enough that when the founders went in to talk about the Second Amendment, they weren't interested in protecting the rights of free blacks to own guns. In fact, they were fine with the assumption that the white people in those states would deny free blacks their constitutional rights as voted on in the Bill of Rights. As was pointed out to me on Twitter, in the militias, free blacks were allowed to join, but only as buglers or drummers. They were never given a gun. Another person pointed out that in Florida, I think it was, or one of the southern states, militias had the right to go into the homes of free black people or any black person to check if they have a weapon and to confiscate it, thereby violating their Second and Fourth Amendment rights under the Constitution. But they weren't really considered people, were they? Only the white people were considered real people, and especially the white men. But the white women were protected by this system too, and the white women defended it and perpetuated it and taught it to their children. And that is the other side of our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that it was only ever designed to be fully enjoyed by a certain economic level of white men in this country, and the rest of us could go hang, as far as the founders were concerned. We were property in terms of slave property, or there were native populations that were being driven out and genocided in order to get their lands, and then there were women, the white women, who were the property of their husbands. And that is the worldview. That is the white nationalism, the white supremacy built into our Constitution. So how has this been handled? So that's the reality. That's like the first form of identity politics ever played in America was white identity politics. Every other form of identity politics that has come since the 1600s has been a reaction to white identity politics against blacks who were kidnapped to become slaves, or against native peoples, or any other immigrant who was deemed, outside, not white enough to be covered by the laws. And there was a case of a man who was from India, who had like American citizenship. I'll have to find the details, but one case found he was white enough and shouldn't be discriminated against, and then another appeals court went, no, you're not white enough, you can't be discriminated against, something like that. Right? So your rights were tied to your whiteness. And that is a reality. That's what I've inherited. I've not inherited a land of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have all inherited a government that was, from its foundation, grounded in a supremacy of whites. Now, the way that white people have told themselves our history has been to, as much as possible, downplay that embarrassing, painful, immoral framework. And we just pretend, and we're taught in our schools, like, oh yeah, the founders, George Washington, Jefferson, the Constitutional Convention, and oh yeah, there was slavery. And sometimes they talked about slavery. But we're not taught about the way that free blacks were denied their Second Amendment and Fourth Amendment rights routinely. We're not taught, reminded constantly about the way that the laws that were passed were only designed to help white men. That's a little too embarrassing. So, we even now have changed it to be gender inclusive. Didn't it say, all men are created equal, and we now say everyone is created equal, right? And we try to broaden that out to cover up for the fact that it was only meant to be for white men. And that's right. It's right that we should extend that notion out, but we should also acknowledge the fact that we are breaking with the white supremacist past. So this is how I see white supremacy continuing on. White supremacy as a worldview is still bound up in our constitutional structure. And when it has been challenged and expanded, like in terms of civil rights, it doesn't go away. It just takes on more subtle forms. So you get basically the kind of voter gerrymandering, and you get a whole bunch of other like more subtle ways of keeping a white population supremely in power despite changing demographics. And so the softer white supremacy that we swim in our American culture is this idea that white people are the natural rulers, white people naturally occupy positions of power, and when you start to see white people of color in not just like as leaders of the black church or a black church, but as a bishop or an archbishop, or you start to see more experts, people of color, being talked to or taking part in conversations, or running for office, or being the person who is the CEO. And that slight discomfort kind of adds up in the heads of people who are just used to being in a white bubble and seeing white faces in those authorities. And that anxiety is one of losing a protected, elevated status. And that I do think has some psychological ramifications that make white people feel uncomfortable, because we don't know how to be a minority in our own country because we've never had to be. And so, I remember when I was 17, I went to actually a conference on racism in Philadelphia, flew out with a friend who was the daughter of the socialist librarian of our high school. And we were like two white girls in the middle of this conference, and everyone else there was black. And I walked into the room, and for the first time, I was not the dominant part of the dominant group. And it hit me that, wow, most people, if you're not white, you have this experience all the time. And I had to wait 17 years before I had it. And I haven't had it that many times since. So we don't know how to process that because we lack the experience, because we've been born into a system that tells us we are the natural leaders, that we are the faces, that you can be like Dr. So-and-so here. And that kind of white supremacy is not a conscious thing that we tend to talk about. So it's a little bit more subtle thing to confront. And this is when I think people default into, I just don't see color. Like, yeah, you do. Everyone sees color. don't get around it by denying it, because there is a power dimension that comes with being white or not white, or, brown, black. There is a history. There are stereotypes. And because you have the privilege as a white person of setting that aside, because you don't really confront that in your daily life, that doesn't mean that all those other people aren't affected by all the other people who see color. So I think white people have a very, very bad, we don't have good tools. We're not in our society given good role models for talking about being white and the legacy and what our inheritance is as white Americans. And before I go on any further, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of white guilt. My understanding of what white guilt means is to be sort of like taking on moral responsibility and accountability and regret for the actions of people that are not you, right? So the counter argument would be, well, my family, they weren't slavers. My history has nothing to do with slavery. It's not my fault that there is a racist system that arrests and prosecutes and jails African Americans at 5 times the rate or 3 times the rate of whites for the similar crimes. That's not my fault. I didn't do that. The implication being, therefore, I have no responsibility for it. And I think people who want to use the phrase white guilt want to talk white people out of changing the white supremacy that is around us. White guilt is a way to psychologically tie you to defending white supremacy and white supremacy in America's history as your history. And this is what I want to say about F that. I don't have that kind of white guilt. I am not about... I am freed from my white guilt. I feel no obligation to defend the founding fathers, from the fact that they created a white supremacist government that was designed to provide a great amount of power and equality within a very small elite, racial class elite. And they had some good ideas that we need to appropriate and give to more people. But I don't have to defend everything in the Constitution as being worth defending because, we can set aside the idea that it makes people 3/5 of a person. That's an archaic thing that we don't even have to talk about anymore. No, we have to talk about it because it was inherent to the way power was developed. And we ignore the white supremacy in our history as white Americans. We're not making it go away. We're helping to preserve it. Denying inherent and systematic racism in our culture, in our power systems, in our economics, the legacy of that is a defense of white supremacy. It's a defense of a sort of white nationalism. And so we have to talk about it as part of the wider conversation. So I feel that the way white supremacy worked in my life was I was born as a white woman, girl, into a country that has centuries of history of racist suppression against non-whites, that for centuries or more like decades, people have been taking steps to overturn. But being born into that system, I am freed from my white guilt. I don't feel defensive when people point out Thomas Jefferson was a rapist. It's a fact of history. If you are having sex with someone who has no legal capacity for consent because they are a slave and they aren't recognized as a human being under law, they cannot give consent. So it's rape. It's always rape. It's like with somebody who is under the age of consent and they think they want to have sex. They don't have the legal authority to make those decisions for themselves because they don't exist as a legal entity that we can hold accountable. They need to be protected. And so, people who get upset, wasn't there just Aaron Burr had a child recognized from outside marriage, and maybe it was a person of colors too. I mean, there's a lot of flaws with the founding fathers, and covering up those flaws only advances one agenda, and that is to, rescue from history white supremacists from their actual moral actions. So I don't feel the need to like defend the founding fathers when it comes to their moral failings. And I don't feel a need to defend the Constitution is sort of like saying, oh, I can't, if I even criticize the 3/5 thing, I'm criticizing the whole Constitution. No, you can have some good ideas and some bad ideas, but you have to have the bravery to at least call bad ideas out as much as you talk about the good ones. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're covering up for white supremacy. And the whole history of how after slavery, people were just walked away from, there's a whole legacy of poverty that comes back to the fact that for generations, black families were not allowed to possess or even transfer wealth through inheritance to build that up over generations, whereas the American government stole a bunch of land from the native peoples and then just handed it out to white people in the Homestead Act. It was the greatest government giveaway to create wealth probably since, after that, probably the GI Act in terms of investment in white America. So my family's wealth didn't come from their hard work. I mean, they did work hard. A lot of people work hard in life. But my inheritance, like what's going to come down to me, when my dad bought the 40 acres that my great-great-grandmother got as part of the Homestead Act, that was just socialism, if you want to talk about it in a right-wing way. That was just government handouts. 40 acres handed out to some black people, but mostly white people. Mostly white people. To build up their wealth, to put them on the land, to occupy it and defend it against raids from the native peoples that we are stealing it from, to create a state and a government so we could put them onto reservations and then pull back on the agreements we made and renege on those too. Because the American government has white people, they can't trust white people who sign contracts, is what native peoples found out. And you can't even deny that. White men lied to them because they thought they were racially superior. And that's our history. That's why there are reservations. And that's why there's poverty, because they were denied the kind of transfer of inheritance year on year that was given out by the American government to white people. So, recognizing that my family's wealth is grounded in racism. And yeah, I'm saying they worked hard. For the people who inherited that, they worked hard and they put their investment in and they did their businesses. But the starting seeds was based on racial discrimination, and it was a big government handout, a white supremacy sort of government handout to whites to dominate a landscape, to geographically occupy and dominate a landscape. So that's where my family's wealth comes from. Now, do I have to then somehow feel obligated to say that that wasn't wrong? Or to say that somehow that was justified? Or is really not a big a deal? Well, clearly that role of government shapes people's lives. And if we want to, I guess maybe I'm a little naive in that I did grow up believing in the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is actually the birthright of all Americans, all citizens, whether you're born at a base off, if you're born at a military base to American parents, or your parents crossed over the border for a better life and you're born on our soil, or you come here and you naturalize and you take the oath to become a citizen, or you're born here. That's the same right we are all supposed to get, and the same hope that we are all entitled to based on our citizenship. That's my view of America. That's my view of what it means to be American. It's not about how white you are. It's about the kind of hope and opportunities that your citizenship should bestow upon you. And then an equal level and equal footing is the goal for the kind of America where we could see people actually realize their goals, become who they can most fully be. So because I am idealistic in that way, I am more attached to defending the America I want to see in the future rather than excusing the white supremacy of the past. The white supremacy of the past has no place in an egalitarian America. And the way to deal with that is to acknowledge our white supremacist history and how our white identity comes right out of that. And to question American white identity as the group sort of that runs America, or just a group that is part of America, and changing our worldview from being the naturally assumed dominant leaders, the people, like, frustrates me to no end how Joe Biden is basically being allowed to be a terrible gaffe machine because he's not as bad as Trump. Like, is that really how we're gonna, like, measure our white men? Like, well, he's less of a F up than the other guy, who we tolerate way too much of because he's a white guy. Getting me off on a sidetrack. But anyway, acknowledging that's where your history is, where your country is, and then moving forward, that's what I think the job of a progressive is to acknowledge that white supremacist past, acknowledge how it's formed American white identity within the culture as preserving itself and hiding itself and looking natural. I mean, I think for me as a Northerner, it's more easy to point to the Confederacy, and it's the I don't understand, like, as a white person, like, I don't understand this attachment. This is one thing, like, I really don't get, to defending, you know, racist ass slave-owning, slavery defending white people in the 21st century. Why are we having monuments to traitors? Why are you flying a Confederate flag? Do you not understand that that is an affront to the modern, what the modern America is? Yeah, the Confederacy was compatible with a white supremacist outlook because they were, you know, more caught up in their white supremacist structure. We've been trying to dismantle that structure. I think that's a natural progression of where America needs to go. But you've got people who have this attachment to ultimately, you know, defend a form of white supremacy and to discount a human atrocity of slavery and all the pain and suffering that caused. And that is the kind of, like, I don't get it attachment to white identity, racist white identity. So for me, a good example of how white nationalism is carried forward from generation to generation, it's easiest for me to point to the Confederacy and the romanticizing of the Confederacy and the attachment to the Confederacy. It's an attachment to white power, to white supremacy, and to basically a white nationalism, a sort of way of existing in which whites held status and they just took what they wanted from anyone else. And defending the South as states' rights or any other way of normalizing it is a way to play down that white supremacy, and therefore it's a way to slide it forward to another generation. I think there's more white guilt that comes from conservatives who want to emotionally manipulate or play off of or shame you into saying, oh, you're basically saying everything about the Constitution is bad because it has the taint of slavery and you don't like America. No, I don't like American white supremacy. That's what I don't like. And I don't feel a need to defend that. I don't feel the need to defend the founders from the reality of their own white supremacy or the other systems of power that existed afterwards to maintain white men's supremacy. Why would I feel the only guilt, you know, if I felt guilty about that, maybe I would defend it, but I don't have white guilt for the white supremacist history that I've been born into. I don't feel the need to defend it. I don't feel the need to not challenge it. I don't feel the need to carry it on through our culture and practice and symbols like the symbol of the Confederate flag. It's the people who bear the white supremacist burden of our forefathers. They're the people with white guilt. They're the people who are carrying the water for people who thought their fellow Americans that they know and love and care about were literally inferior beings. You don't have, this is, like, you can be freed from that assumption. You can be freed from the idea that you have to defend all of the bad stuff that happened with the Constitution in order to keep the good. You don't. In fact, divorcing the bad from the good is how we get to a better place. And so with all of this, I know I've showed this before. This will be the end of the show, you guys. I want to go back to a video that was done by Dr. Eddie Glaude. It wasn't a video done, it was an appearance. Because, and I mentioned this before, that his ideas on being freed from being white, like, I think I finally got it now. When I first heard this video, it blew my freaking mind. Had no idea how to process the idea of being freed from being white. I didn't even know what that phrase meant. That's kind of what set me off on this whole exploration and where I've been and what I've been focused on in the last couple of weeks, because of the way that he said these things. So while I'm nattering on this, I wanted to do some sort of video series. At least the idea was to do a video series. But as you can tell from my ramblings, there's a lot of stuff to get through. And I'm not quite sure how best to present it or what is the most important thing to show. So I'm going to, first I'll go to my channel. I want to show you guys my playlist. I'm starting to archive, what's the word I'm looking at? Curate videos. This is here in the playlist, Whiteness and White Identity. But as I said, before I went into that too much, I decided it was really important for me to get my own thoughts straight first. And that's what I'm going to be doing as I look forward and, do more research on this. But as I said, I don't feel like I'm a huge expert at this. I don't feel, my confidence in speaking on racial equality does not come from an academic grounding where I, thoroughly know stuff. I know what I feel in my heart is right. What we should be doing as a country and versus what we actually do. Let me go. Yep. Eddie Glaude. Yeah, this is the one we're looking for. I'm going to hit pause here. That's why I'm a little bit struggling on what to do as a video series, because I don't feel like I can talk about it. I've read this person, I've read that person. It's more a personal testimony, maybe more like an evidence video series. But I feel like white people need role models. White people need role models on how to talk about racial equality. And because it's sometimes difficult for people to get over, they need to confront the whole, listening to black people as experts. I know for me, as a person I go to a lot as a role model is Tim Wise, because he's the first white guy I saw who actually would talk about these things basically in a way that was no different from what I was seeing from black commentators on MSNBC, but it was a white person saying it. I don't know if you understand how mind-blowing that was. That was pretty mind-blowing, because I'm so used to hearing the need for racial justice as a discourse to be coming out of the mouths of people who aren't white. And this is like women talking to men about patriarchy, that you can be an outsider, the one who's affected and oppressed, and it's your job to somehow educate your oppressor and also not hurt his feelings, because then he might not like you and he won't listen to you if he doesn't like you, whether or not your arguments are right. And so to hear a white person talk about racial injustice was very, very liberating for me, because there is a kind of critique you can do from within a power system that is different and more potent, I think, than a critique you can do from outside. And that's why allyship is so important. And it's why, as uncomfortable and as uncertain as I was to talk about these issues, I also realized the importance of having the conversation, of trying, of being a white person who is going through a process of self-reflection. And it's not the stereotype of self-flagellation, white guilt, let's just hand out money for reparations. It's the kind of white reflection that goes, damn, my family were given government-sponsored land, and we've been inheriting that wealth and growing it for 4 generations now, whereas black people were just turned out on the streets, basically, weren't educated, weren't compensated for their lost labor, and they just inherited nothing or debt from generation to generation, long before my family was handed land for free. So how can we compensate people who have been historically disadvantaged to bring them up to the same level as every other American so that they can be on the same playing field, get quality education. How do we fix that? How do we address that and redress the inequality that we've been ignoring as white people? So there's a difference in how we talk about this, from a defensive sort of white guilt, which is to preserve the white supremacy, versus a liberation from white guilt, which is to say, I don't have to protect this racist system I was born into. I don't have to defend the founders for their white supremacy because I'm white too. I don't owe them that. That's not my baggage to carry. That's not my luggage to handle, for other people. Like, I can set that down and just go, yeah, racist AF. Yeah. So let's find out how that racism has tainted the good ideas and what can we do to bring more people into the circle of the white privilege that, I've been enjoying as a white woman, the kind of experience I have, and expand that out so other people don't feel scared to drive or worried about being hassled by a racist Becky or have 911 call on them because they're at a pool. How can everyone have a life where they are freed from that kind of bullshit? So I'm going to listen to, again, Eddie Glaude, and he's a chair, which means a professor, at the Department of African American Studies at Princeton. And what he is going to say is something that really resonated with me because it's easy as a white person to say, I'm not David Duke, therefore I'm not part of the problem. I disagree with Donald Trump, therefore I'm not part of the problem. But the problem that they're not admitting is, well, I'll vote for Donald Trump, but that doesn't make me a racist. Yeah, it kind of does. Actually, it's worse. If you were just casually racist in your daily life, you'd only be able to affect the people in your area and you interact with. When you vote for someone you know is a racist, you are giving political power to a racist. That's worse. Voting for Trump, while you know he is a racist, or you don't care that he's a racist, is worse than actually being a racist, in my opinion. Empowering racism is far worse than just having an attitude. Now, I am a white person, so I can have that privilege. And maybe other people call me out and tell me why I'm wrong. But it just seems to me if you're voting for a person you know is going to enact racist policies, that is actually worse than just having an opinion about people that you keep to yourself in a latent way or only, say around other white people after you've looked around to make sure there aren't any people of color around because you don't have the balls to say it to their face. You want your little white-only safe space to make your racist jokes. So brave. All right. I think with all that background, maybe a way you will hear this discussion about being white in America and what America is in its past might be different from what you thought at the beginning of the show. I have no idea how the sound on this is going to go. Oh, actually, I see I have my desktop audio muted. Let me see. What else can I do here? I'll turn the volume up to about 50. You guys can tell me if you've just been blown out of the water. So we're going to do a sound check. If you have headphones, maybe take them out right now. Warning granted. All right. Oh, that's on high. So let's just do a quick test here. America's not... So looks to me that seems all right. In fact, I think I can even turn it up a little bit on the OBS to get it to the yellow, which is where I am. All right, so we're going to hear this clip now. It's about 3 minutes long. I don't know that we'll make it all the way to the end because there's a side conversation we don't need to hear and, fair use. And being monetized, I'll probably just have my first video back from monetization, copyright claimed by MSNBC. Them's the breaks.
Unique in its sins.
Overgain on my mic? I thought I turned my mic down. I'll show you guys what I see. So from my mic, it doesn't look like my gains are... I actually took my gain off from... Oh, wrong one. I noticed that problem before. I'll try even turning it down a bit more. But when I did my filters, I took, on my noise suppression, my compressor, my gain... I'm not putting any more gains, and I took my gain filter off. So, over limiting? All right, I'll bring it down a bit more. Is that even better? I don't know, that seemed a little low to me. All right. It's so hard to tell. Okay. Right. Well, with that, we're just going to play. At this point, we're almost to the end of the show, so if my audio's been crappy this whole time, my apologies. According to how it looks to me, it should be just fine. Too quiet now. You guys are the worst. You're the absolute worst. You really are. Ratio needs to 6. Let me check. Alright, see if that's any better. But now I think I might be a bit too close. You miss Google Hangouts. Yeah, you never thought you'd say that day, would you? Never thought you'd see the day when you'd be missing Google Hangouts. Yeah, I put it on my compressor. I know it's lagged. Yeah, my compressor. Oops, sorry. Yep, that's what I just did. On my properties. Alright. So now we're doing the sound check. We should do this at the start of the show, you guys. We really should. Should do that at the start of the show. I keep doing the wrong one. Dang, I not having enough coffee today. Hold on. Oh, happily I didn't just cut off my own stream. Output to 1 dB. Someone's doing like live advanced properties. Output gain to -1 dB. Alright. Some clipping. Alright, thanks you guys. I do appreciate it. See if this is a better sound quality when I'm talking with a higher volume. Yeah, we definitely should... oh, cool. Yeah, we should do these sound tests at the beginning. Appreciate your feedback, you guys. I could do a thing where I just wait and talk and listen to myself, but I get too bored for that. Alright, so now that we've got that, we have to go back to the previous video.
As a country, we're not unique in our evils.
Alright, well let's hope now that... Also, I'll just leave those all on default, so hopefully that'll fix my OBS mic going forward. And I forget that it's a reverse order. You guys can tell me if my mic is too sensitive. Yeah, I've got too good a mic. My mic is too good. Which is becoming a problem, as we've noticed for the happy hour as well. Okay. So, as long as the audio, I'll just wait to see any feedback on the... What's the word I'm thinking of now? I'm looking for feedback on the audio for the breaking news. You guys can tell me. What I can also do is I'll put on the closed captions, and I can increase the screen a little bit, and that should help. Also, if there's too little sound, you'll be able to read the screen. All right, so let's listen to Professor Eddie Glaub on racism in America.
America's not unique in its sins. As a country, we're not unique in our evils, to be honest with you. I think where we may be singular is our refusal to acknowledge them. And the legends and myths we tell about our inherent, goodness to hide and cover and conceal so that we can maintain a kind of willful ignorance that protects our innocence. See, the thing is that
that was really important. A willful ignorance that protects our innocence. And to me, what that phrase means is we're taught a sanitized version of American history that allows us to be proud of our country without actually acknowledging the suffering that was imposed on millions of others in order to obtain it. So in order for the white men to write that constitution for themselves and other men like them, at what cost did that come in terms of the lives of slaves, the lives of Native peoples, the lives of women, white women and women of color across, their nexus of intersectional discrimination, free black men and free black women. Those people weren't taken into consideration when we wrote the Constitution. And when we forget that, it allows us as white Americans to feel better about ourselves and our Constitution, because we don't have to carry the weight of that racist burden in our conscious minds and acknowledge that. So our innocence, that the lies that we're told, the distorted tales that we are told as a child and growing up in white America, whatever color you are, this lie is told. It's a distortion that is meant to downplay the moral atrocities that were committed in order to get a small group a large amount of freedom. And when we start to break that down, the weight, once we lose our innocence, then the weight of what was done in order to get us our freedoms it starts to become a bit more apparent, and also the ways in which it is still not equal. So these are the lies that we tell our children, and these are the lies that white America, the edited history, the lies of omission that get repeated in school books and in family histories.
When the Tea Party was happening, we were saying, pundits, oh, it's just about economic populism. It's not about race. When people knew, social scientists were already writing that what was driving the Tea Party were anxieties about demographic shifts, that the country was changing, that they were seeing these racially ambiguous babies on Cheerios commercials, that the country wasn't quite feeling like it was a white nation anymore. And people were screaming from the top of their lungs, yo, this is not just simply economic populism. This is the ugly underbelly of the country. See, the thing is this, and I'll say this and I'll take the hit on it. There are communities that have had to bear the brunt of America white Americans confronting the danger of their innocence.
Again, mind blown. Who pays the price for these lies that white Americans tell themselves about the moral superiority and not at all ambiguous or challengeable on the issues of human rights and slavery founding fathers? We don't pay that price. There are other people who are born into systems that were designed to keep Black people down and Native American people excluded, and not white enough people of color to the margins of white society. Whether that's, based on, 3/4, how much blood you have, how many generations back where, like you had a grandfather who was Black and all that kind of bullshit, right? We don't pay the price for the lies that we tell ourselves and the stories, the sanitized version of our history that we have keep going. But you know who pays the price? The children, the non-white kids who grow up right alongside the white kids who were lied to, and therefore the white kids aren't doing anything to change the system that was oppressing those kids' parents and their grandparents going all the way back to the founding, when the slaves first arrived on American shores. So when white America lies to itself to make itself feel better and clean about the rights we enjoy, we're not doing anything to fix the problems. We don't bear the brunt of the lies we tell, all of us, ourselves and others. Other people bear those costs, and then we get upset when we see them, as if saying, oh, it's your fault. If we understood our history, would know it's the system that created the conditions to put that person in that situation, and acknowledge that. But when we lie to ourselves that we aren't a white supremacist country, our history wasn't founded in perpetuating supremacy of white men, a very limited number of propertied white men compared to the rest of the country, we can't see that problem.
And it happens every generation. So somehow we have to kind of, oh my God, is this who we are?
I mean, that is precisely the thing he is describing, the process I went through. Oh my gosh. Is this really what America is? When you're a white person, you finally, the blinders drop and the patriotism haze clears, and the shame about not kneeling for the flag and whatever else they use to emotionally put you into a corner as a white person to keep you on board with defending that white supremacy. And you see America for what it really is. You see the racist Beckys, and you see the Nazis marching. And you see the Trump rallies where it's like blindingly white because people of color, unless they're there with their MAGA hats, they don't feel comfortable there. They don't feel safe in those spaces with those people. And seeing those white supremacists and those white racist Beckys from not their position, but from the position of the person of color. And then thinking, is this who we really are? And the answer being yes. Yeah. Still. This is not that different from how a racist Becky would have acted in the 1860s. How much progress have we really made as white Americans in dealing with the racism that we inherited from previous generations? Don't do much. We don't do much.
And just again, here's another generation of babies. Think about it. A 2-year-old had his bones broken by 2 parents trying to shield him from being killed. A woman who has been married to this man for as long as I've been on the planet almost, lost her husband. For what? And so what we know is that the country has been playing politics for a long time on this hatred.
He's very diplomatic. When he says the country has been playing politics on the issue of racism for a long time, he means white people. And he's being very diplomatic and not saying it, but I'll say it. It's white people who play politics with these racial issues in order to keep themselves in a position of power and to not face the actual racism of other white people, because we find it more discomforting to acknowledge that other people who look like us are the kind of racists we fear other people of color think we are. And talking to those white people about their racism, we feel less comfortable doing that than we do just ignoring the suffering of people of color in America. Generalizing to white Americans here, but I think just generally, that's not inaccurate for the more latent racist type of worldview. The worldview that doesn't actively go out there and think bad thoughts, but just sort of assumes that white people should be running things. Assumes, the natural supremacy of white men in particular as having authority. So we're seeing that again. This is a come to Jesus moment, as it were, for white Americans, because everyone else has already figured this shit out.
We know this. So it's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. It's easy for us to place Pittsburgh on his shoulders. It's easy for me to place Charlottesville on his shoulders. It's easy for us to place El Paso on his shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us. I've had the privilege of growing up in a tradition that didn't believe in the myths and the legends because we had to bear the brunt of them.
Right? His community bears the brunt for white people living in a Disneyland to say that they're really good people and there's nothing wrong with America today. And if all these black people would just stop complaining about being shot by the police or arrested without, a fair amount of probable cause, or killed while in police custody, or convicted at a higher rate than whites, or detained in prison at a higher rate, if they would just stop complaining about their oppressed status, then everything would be fine. As opposed to saying, our country is effed up when it comes to issues of race and we need some serious reforms around here. Because this is not the America that I pledge to when I get up and talk about, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. What republic are you standing for when it's exploiting and ignoring and harming vast swaths of its own citizenry? So again, this is an internal conversation that white people need to have with each other, as much as it is about, listening to other people's experiences and validating it. We need to figure out as white people what we can do to change things in terms of attitudes and outlooks and outcomes. But yeah, his family bore the brunt of our ignorance and our little white fairy tale that we like to tell ourselves, and that we don't live with consequences of ignoring the inherently racist past of our country.
Either we're going to change, Nicole, or we're going to do this again and again, and babies are going to have to grow up without mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts.
Oops, sorry. My bad.
Friends, while we're trying to convince white folk to finally leave behind a history that will maybe, or embrace a history that might set them free from being white. Finally.
His phrase, freed from being white, was the one that really, as you guys know if you've watched my channel, stuck with me. Because I had no idea what that phrase was even meant to be. Freed from being white. White is having white privilege. Why would I need to be freed from being white? And what I realize now, after many weeks of thinking about this, a little bit of listening to other experts, some personal analysis, so, like a month. This was published on the 6th of August. I think I saw it on the day of or the day after. What he means is be freed from that baggage of defending white nationalism, white supremacy, of hiding the cruelty under a discourse of liberty, of feeling it necessary to carry forward the legacy of the Confederacy, to defend Robert E. Lee, to defend monuments to dead traitors. That's what it means to be freed from being white in America. It means letting go of this racist bullcrap that was put on your shoulders as a child and said, this is your water to carry. This is now your white burden to take forward, is to cover up for our racist past and to minimize it as much as possible, because we feel a little bit uncomfortable when we have to deal with the consequences of the benefits of our society gives us that it doesn't give other people. And what it means to be freed from being white is to acknowledge that white supremacy, at least to my mind. It means understanding and acknowledging the extent to which our history is a white supremacist history. And that as a white person, I actually have a choice. And I don't have to defend that. I don't have to take that on as part of my identity. I don't have to see that as something that I need to defend when I talk about what it means to be an American. So not having white guilt means not carrying water for slavers, not defending the founding fathers against charges that they were racists. It means being an American who is committed to the ideas that inspire us, but not to the institutions that have ultimately failed most, non-white people for centuries, and to want to conceive an actual American state, nation, that looks at your citizenship first and not the color of your skin. And acknowledge the color of your skin, but the thing that we should be focused on is not crime in the black community per se. Is it why are we allowing Americans to be shot? What can we do to transform the situation so that these Americans feel safe and not divided into the black community, the white community? So, that to me would be a step forward, because this othering of black community, Hispanic community, and then you talk to white, what is hilarious to me is that when you call someone a white man and he says that's sexist and racist because you're noticing I'm white and that I'm a man. Wow, you little snowflake. How many times have you talked about the black community without any regard for what it might be like to be discussed in that way? Or black men doing this and that and the other thing. But just calling white people freaks some white people out. They just don't have a framework for not being the default identity. Even the phrase non-white people just means everybody else. So it doesn't even include white people within a kind of comparison there. She's got non-white people or people of color. And that's what we remark on. We don't remark on the white people. Well, you need to talk about white people being white people. It's okay. And that's kind of where I am. So I've been, as I said, thinking about this stuff a lot. And I'm not sure where I'm going with it yet. But I think there's a lot in this that needs to be spun out. And I don't know if what I've said in the show today is something that has made you reflect or think at all. If these are thoughts you've already had or heard from other people. But this is where I am now, myself, in terms of my thinking and my discussions. And I just see so much more white supremacy now as a consequence of having this worldview. I see white supremacy not only as the marchers, the far-right marchers who come out, or the Proud Boys who go to, get in scuffles in the streets with people. I see it in the rhetoric of the president. I see it in the way that GOP people, like for instance in Florida, where it was done by popular vote, a referendum, to allow people who have had their felonies, have served their time, to get their voting rights back. And then you get white people coming in saying, well, they can get their voting rights back, but they have to pay all these fines, and they have to go through this special process, and they have to get permission, and it's not guaranteed, and they have to pay money. That's Jim Crow. That's just putting up another obstacle to someone getting their rights back because of the color of their skin. And so we have a big problem with white supremacy every day all over this country. And until we start talking about it and calling it out and saying what it really is and being comfortable with that, then nothing's going to change. You know, we're going to stay in our own white little ignorant bubble, and other people pay the cost and the price for the fairy tale and our ignorance of our own history and our own country's present. Right, guys, that's all I had to say. But it was a lot. So I want to thank you for giving me feedback on my sound. I will leave these settings. Hopefully these will carry over to the next show. Also, I'll pass on the information to Kevin. We should probably do a sound check at the beginning of every show for a couple of minutes so we get our sound levels right. And white guilt similar to survival's guilt? I don't think so. I think 250 asks, is white guilt similar to survivor's guilt? Survivor's guilt, from what I understand, is the reaction to seeing a lot of other people experience the same, they all died and you didn't. So you had an exceptional experience compared to the people who suffered more. White guilt is about feeling uncomfortable talking about the reality of racial discrimination or racial bias or racial whatever, the suffering caused by racism. Because you're not personally affected by it, and so so there's a lot of ways you can talk about white guilt and what it means to have white guilt. So one, you could think about, I feel bad that other people are experience racism. That's not really what they mean by white guilt. What they mean by white guilt is it's a cudgel to use. If I were to talk about, the slavery of the South and the suffering that was created and how African Americans are still suffering under racist policies, they're suffering the consequences of racist policies that we've never really addressed as white people, and white people, we need to do this and take this on board. They'll turn around and saying, you're just feeling white guilt. You're feeling like you have a responsibility to right the wrongs of your ancestors. And they'll try to shame you out of feeling like you have a moral responsibility to address today's racism by saying you shouldn't feel guilty about things that you didn't do as a white person. So I think they're very, very different. 2 race-related stories I want to tell you off camera. Okay. Yeah, sound is great. All right, thanks to JMN. Please come and do a sound check with us for the next happy hour. Right. Yeah. I think I'm going to wrap it up for this show. So again, thanks for the sound quality check. We'll do that at the start of the show if you guys remind me in the chat. And I guess at this point, I'll say that I'll read the comments below about your thoughts about white supremacy and white identity and all that kind of stuff. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I can't promise anything right now. But what I can promise is that I will be back next Sunday, and probably doing some happy hours before. The one thing I would like is if I were to turn this into a more standardized video, that would be actually really helpful. If you guys have some ideas about how I could maybe turn this into something that's a little bit more bite-sized digestible, or another format rather than like an hour-and-a-half live show. Okay, guys, that's it. I will see you next time. Thank you for stopping by. And don't forget the podcast. If you want to catch up with the happy hour, there is going to be a podcast episode released every day until the 12th of September, which is when we will be hopefully almost completely caught up. So check that out on Podbean, and thank you guys for watching. So until next time, you guys, goodbye from me. Thank you for people in the chat who are watching. Thanks for the people who come by later on, stick through all my bad audio in order to make it to the good stuff this far into the show. I have been Christy. You all have been awesome. Have a great rest of your day, wherever and whenever it is that you are. Okay, bye.